Hi, everyone. So first of all, is everyone having a good festival? Okay, great. I am so excited to be here with you all today, and I think this panel that's coming up is super important, and it's very aligned with the Institute's mission, which is really that we want to put a spotlight on underrepresented voices and connect them with audiences, and this is something that is a global initiative of ours. So this theme of today's panel is really exciting to us. I also want to just say that I'm really grateful to everyone at the Muslim House and also at Doris Duke Foundation for their amazing contributions to this community. We can't do this without you all, and so we're really, really grateful. And then I also like to always give a shout out to the folks who are the helpers here. So the people who are helping to feed us, the people who are helping to run the doors, the people who are running the cameras. All of these people make this possible, so let's give them all a big shout out. And finally, I want to give a big shout out to Luna, who's part of our team at the Institute. She's incredible. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to one of our board of trustees, Amy Redford.
Thank you so much. The rich tradition here of storytelling, Muslim storytelling, has been a tradition before we were actually identifying it. And it was something that shaped conversation around, civil discourse and our understanding of what this community is for a very long time. The excellence in this community of storytelling is so deep and so rich, and the work that's come out has been so beautiful, and that will continue. But we also need to galvanize together. And Luna has been an incredible facilitator between the organization and this community, and and to be able to foster new conversations and create intersection where they wouldn't have existed previously. And it's really what Sundance is all about, and meeting the artists where they need to be met. What do you need? What prevents you? In this community in particular, what prevents you from being able to get your stories out to the people that you really need to hear them? And sometimes that means you really just have to deconstruct those barriers for entry and sail it across the bow, right? And sometimes it means, okay, well, how do we get this into the commercial mindset? How do we keep people from going like this because they're afraid? So this is an incredible opportunity, and I really hope that you continue to be a part of our conversation and come apply to our labs and look at all of the resources Sundance has to offer, because we need you. We need you in this conversation. We need you in this moment more than ever. And hopefully we'll continue to do right by this community. So thank you, and enjoy your festival. Thank you.
And then now I want to present Shaping the World Through Muslim Storytelling. So I would like to introduce our moderator, Naira Haq, who is a journalist, CNN commentator, and associate dean at Syracuse. Thank you, Naira.
I'm going to bring up the rest of our panelists so we can start this conversation. Let's get up Julia Basha, creative director at Just Vision. Julia, thank you. Farhan Latif, president at Al Hibri Foundation. Mohanad Malas, founder of M Labs and many other titles. And Zaib Sheikh, who is the producer currently. I think everybody has multiple titles. We're going to try to mix in within our conversation some of their backgrounds so you can see the depth of experience they're bringing to this conversation. I want to start with the fact that we all recognize, being here, that words and images have power, but something has changed recently. There's been a massive disruption in how words and images get selected, who gets to shape and share those. And we're noticing this across media, across social dynamics, particularly in film, where direct-to-consumer contact not only happens, but it's starting to create change. We are seeing traditional gatekeeping fall a little bit, and something else is being created. And so we're going to try to figure out what is being created in that space. I'm going to start with Mohanad. And you have been not only in the investing space, but in the film business. Not your first rodeo at the Oscars, but congratulations on the nomination for the voice of Hind Rajab. But you've been to the BAFTA and Oscars. What's different right now?
Well, first of all, the part of the story, right? It's no, being at a Muslim house, a religious thing, it's no incident or coincidence that the Bible, the Old Testament, the New Testament, and the Quran are just a collection of stories. And that's how we are humanly wired. We just know to listen to stories, we understand, we relate, and learn through that process. So this is why what we do is important. And there is an African proverb that says, the hunter will always be glorified until such time that the lion can speak or write. So that's what's happening to us. And that's the change that we are actually going through right now. We're finding ways that changes are happening from within and changes are happening from outside. From within, our community for the first time, as witnessed by the number of people here, it used to be that, me included, as a father of 3 daughters, I just wanted to get a degree, as we all know, the medical, the lawyer, the whatever. The change now is, yes, that is part of our lives. This is a story we need to be telling. So that is a major change. I remember a time, which is actually not long ago, which I heard from somebody on this panel earlier today, that when they had a daughter performing in a school play, the community, some people were saying, haram. Like literally that word haram has caused our destruction for the last 6, 7 generations around in this country and around the world as well, misinterpreting and misunderstanding what Islam and Muslim really is about. But that change is definitely happening from within and happening from without. The other change happening from within, before I go to what's happening from outside, is that for the first time, we have no shortage of stories, no shortage of talent, but for the first time, there is real funding coming behind it. Doris Duke Foundation is the leader that has played that role, but I can name you 5, 6 institutions that are coming up with big amounts of money, taking the role of what Doris Duke has done and realizing the impact that it does. And that is a big change that we need to be able to latch on, take advantage of, and show and build on, because that has a spiral effect. So from outside, it's the idea now is many gatekeepers, as was said earlier of the previous panel, they'd rather see us go away. Like, they don't want to see us here. Our voices are not welcome for all the reasons that were mentioned by Mehdi and by Sue and by Salam earlier. And yet, this is the time for us to change the rules. We're playing by rules that were set against us. They were written for let's say it, for the white Caucasian aspect, and then there's a group in Hollywood that were the gatekeepers. Clearly, the streamers came and disrupted that. That was one thing. It opened the way for, the TikToks of the world. But again, every one of those, whether Instagram or Facebook, ultimately got censored. Now, TikTok, as mentioned by Mehdi, there's a plan for its acquisition. And the disaster that we see our goal, or at least I personally, again, touched upon by Mehdi, is people like David Allison and people, not only have they acquired the ability now to be owning, CBS and acquiring Paramount that is going to dictate and direct. I mean, we've seen what Barry Weiss is now there. I mean, she would not even criticize an actual cameraman that was hit in Israel by her own network. They wouldn't even bring that up to the point. So this is a change that is really a negative change. And as we see now, there's a big bid for Warner Brothers, and it has HBO and HBO Plus, and they even own CNN. Larry Ellison, David Ellison, and that team is about to keep outbidding Netflix in that acquisition.
So Mohammed, on that point though, and there's a fascinating thing happening also in these traditional ways of sharing and distributing news, which is that it's literally a dying audience, right? Cable news, the average cable news viewer is 65 years old. So the grasping, and that's CNN, Fox is older, right? And you have now Anderson Cooper making how many millions of dollars a night? 400,000 viewers, right? That's a good night. So when you look at the attention to money ratio, it is so much cheaper now to get attention for less money. With that, though, you have been working on a great project that was written up in the New York Times, Julia, and it's called, what the Times called it, Bringing Zoran Mahmdani to the Big Screen. Zoran Mahmdani was not somebody blessed by the traditional gatekeepers, and we see this moment of victory that just happened, but your story starts well before that moment of victory.
Thank you so much, first of all, and it's wonderful to be here with this incredible group and with all of you. I want to just remark how extraordinary it is just to be at the Muslim House. I think Sundance has, to talk about change, I think there's been a lot of organizing at this festival and many festivals that has created the space for the programming that has improved dramatically over the years and for this kind of space to exist. And so it's really exciting to be here and be part of this.
And this being global storytelling, it's not just about the Muslim piece, but a key
Right.
part of the global storytelling
Yes.
change.
And so, so a little bit of background on a project that I've been working with at the team at Just Vision, which is a media nonprofit organization that is focused on both documentary filmmaking, investigative journalism, all coupled with intentional impact campaigns to really help shape the narrative, influence perceptions, change social norms, and eventually influence policy change. I've been doing this work now for 22 years, and over that 2 decades, we have witnessed a tremendous shift in public opinion as far as Israel and Palestine is concerned. If you look at Gallup polls that have asked the same question of Americans for 20 years, where do your sympathies lie? 20 years ago, Republicans and Democrats were at the same place, where it's 50 points more likely for Americans to sympathize with Israelis than with Palestinians. And over time, the Americans that identify as Democrats, that line goes into free fall. And as we observed this over the past 20 years of making films about this issue, it really became important to ask the question of what is going to take for that public opinion shift to be translated into policy. And there is a huge, talking about gatekeepers here, in the political sphere. And we were searching for a story that would help us really unpack that, like look at what would it take to really stop this long-standing reality in America that if you're going to participate in electoral politics, you have to abide by a very particular way of speaking about Israelis and Palestinians. And I learned about this state, at the time, assembly member who had introduced a bill called Not on Our Dime. And that bill was attempting to stop the flow of money from charities in New York to settlements in the West Bank. Some of the most violent settlers and some of the biggest settlement enterprises are funded by private New York charities that receive tax-deductible donations. And this is a violation of international law. It's a violation of the laws of charity in the United States. And when Zohran introduced that bill with the help of a handful of fellow elected officials, he was absolutely destroyed. He was told that his political career was over and was abandoned by the vast majority of his colleagues at the legislative. And we were very interested in looking at, okay, what's going to happen at the next election, which was 2024 at that point, because, understandably, based on how our politics play out, a PAC was created to try to make sure that none of the people who supported that bill got reelected. And the people who were for the bill, though, decided to double down at that point. And they actually ran a campaign called Palestine is on the Ballot in New York. And instead of hiding, instead of going shy with it, they actually said, okay, yeah, this is the question. Do you support this or not? Asking directly to their constituents. And so we followed that story and we thought that was going to be our film. And then a few months later, Zohran called me into his office, his constituency office in Astoria, and said that he was going to be running for mayor. And so that's the rest of history. You know the rest of that story. But
But a key part of that story is Jamal Bowman, congressman who, local to his neighborhood, was a teacher and he did lose his seat. for being
Absolutely.
right.
Yes.
He fell to those same forces in that way. That was a win in their column. Yet the audacity, and go back to that idea of the audacity of doubling down on the idea, turned into a win. Farhan, your work with public narrative has taken leaders who want to use their voice and their platform to make social change. How do you coach them or tell them about the value of them telling their story?
Yeah, thank you so much, and it's wonderful to be here. I think this room has so many people just like that, individuals who have incredible stories, complexity, have dealt with challenges, but often when you ask them to come up and talk about their work, they leave their own story out of it. And so what we found through that project with Public Narrative and working with a civil rights organizer, Marshall Gans, and thanks to the support in partnership with Doris Duke and the Harvard Kennedy School, we've had the chance of working with 1,000 individuals who come from grassroots, grass tops, national, public, private, corporate backgrounds, but who are deeply invested in social change and want to try to come out and tell those stories. And it's the most rewarding experience to spend time with people who think they can't be storytellers and then go through this weekend and come out and share that story.
What happens when people don't share their own story? Does something else take the space?
Of course, it's the chance that we're witnessing over the past 50, 100 years. Our stories are being told by others. We're being stereotyped. We're being put, and we've seen that whether it's in the movies, whether in the stories. So that's the problem. Our issue, though, if we do make our movies, and what I find one of the problems is the creators are excited that they finally found somebody to raise money to create the film, right? That's fantastic. We raised $1 million, $2 million, whatever that is, right? The problem is we very often fail to raise enough money to do the marketing. When studios do their films, for a $100 million film, they do a film $50 million promotional budget. So this is something that I find, and that's part of my reason being here and involved, is creatives are not necessarily the best business people. I mean, I think that by your own admittance.
What are you talking about, Mohammed?
And the idea is we got to marry the business with the creatives so that we are able, in the end, our objective is to get those stories told, heard, seen. And that's part of the challenge, is being able to create that ecosystem that enables creatives working with business to come up with the ability to show our stories out.
I was going to add that when we don't tell our stories, we're leaving the canvas blank. And therefore, people will fill in those stories, whether you like it or not. You lose the ability to have what they call interpretive authority, being the first to tell that story when something happens. And I'll give you an example. Sitting at a foundation, we get to hear the best news that's happening and the worst news through the grants process and things. Recently, we came across Ahmed. How many people know Ahmed in this room? Just a few names, few hands. So there was a shooting in Bondi, in Australia, at a Hanukkah practice, 1,000 people celebrating, and a shooting happens, and this man who's sells groceries jumps up, a daughter of 2, and apprehends the shooter and saves hundreds of lives. Now, when you hear the story taking place across the country and you read the headlines, he's not in the stories. We're not telling that story. And if you think about our value system, this idea of saving one life is like saving of humanity and preservation of life and the things that we stand for. But if we're not going out and telling those stories, then other people are claiming those narratives. And I think this is what we see day in and day out.
And that was one of those news moments where there was a direct contrast between the villain and the hero.
Absolutely.
Right? And it could be very flattening to look at them as exactly the same type of person. I wanted to bring you into this, Zaeb, because you, many years ago, many moons ago,
Lots of moons ago.
lots of moons, started and created this character of an imam on Canadian television that was unique to so many of us, of seeing that on TV. Fast forward many more moons, and you're now leaving a position as a diplomat from Canada. So you are intimately connected to the stories that have been told in the US, but also what is now rising and coming out of Canada and the rest of the world. What happens in this moment where, we've implicitly referred to October 7th and the change, what we've seen in news, people standing up, the political change in the headwinds, but what happens when the United States is no longer the leader and the one everyone's looking at to help figure out how we talk about ourselves as a global community? Actually, PM Carney at Canada is everyone looking at him, right?
Yeah, it's always a good moment when you're proud to be a Canadian on the global stage. And so thank you for that. And also, I just want to, it's also it's been so interesting, I'll be honest, through those moons, all those phases, all those Ramadans, alhamdulillah, to be not only a Canadian who represents, but also a Muslim who represents. Because lots of people sleep on Canadians and lots of people sleep on Muslims all the time, especially in the business that we're talking about, right? Mohanad talked about our generational sort of histories not to do with this. In fact, it could be considered haram, as we all know. But it's so pride-inducing to be able to say, and I've been on a lot of panels at film festivals, to be able to say Assalamu alaikum to everyone and Bismillah and all that good stuff. That's also pride-inducing. The U.S., is always fascinatingly binary from a Canadian's point of view, I'll be honest. Everything is black or white, not just people, not just cultures. Everything is right or wrong. Everything is left or right. And in Canada, we grow up not just because of multiculturalism, but because of this idea that Canada is a great project, essentially, not about manifest destiny, but about welcoming the world, especially since Pierre Elliott Trudeau in those days of the 60s and 70s. You grow up, and I was born in that time, and so I grew up around a household that was incredibly feeling Canadian, watched the Leafs and the Habs battle it out for those playoff games in hockey, but also I knew exactly when Salat was happening and when Ramadan was. And I also really understood about my American cousins and friends. But when I came to visit the US, very few people understood what my bag was. And some people, especially in the US, even had, and I remember this as a kid, had the audacity or maybe just the ignorance to ask what color, and this was as a kid, so you got to forgive the kids, but what color the sky is where I came from. And they didn't mean where I came from because of my skin color. They knew I was from Canada, but that was always surprising to me. And so to be on this show that was built essentially and had so many no's from the creator's own viewpoint, but then to have a Canadian network, the Canadian Broadcasting Commission, to say yes to something like that. And I do want to shout out my wife who's in the audience because she was running the network and she's the one who actually said yes to that show. And so if it wasn't for her, and then I was like, somebody sees me and gets me, will you marry me? No, right on that spot. But that's not how, fairy tale. But that launched this, not just the show, but this idea. The show launched in 2005, 2006, very post 9/11. You speak about a post October 7th world. There's lots of post moments in time that Muslims have to deal with, perhaps created by people who aggrandize and fly the banner of what it means to be Muslim. But as Muslims know, that's actually not what is meant to be when you say you're a Muslim. It's the opposite of that. And so if you're saving a life and you save humanity, if you take a life, you take all of humanity. And Muslims know that. And so to be part of a country who understood, or seemingly to this Muslim at least, a country who better understood me as a Muslim, and by no means is Canada the best country of its kind, but it is a very amazing country of its kind. It was beneficial to be in Canada, to be honest, because from that one show, we became a global Muslim show because we were in 80 countries around the world. We were celebrated at things like the Paley Center in New York and Los Angeles. We were almost more recognized, because this is a very Canadian attitude, not to really respect what Canadians are doing or not to applaud them, but we were more applauded around the world almost than we were in Canada. Because for Canada, it was kind of like, yeah, of course we'd see, of course we're going to see these folks on TV. It wasn't the case, but that's what we think of ourselves. And now to be on the global stage many moons later, as you said, I'm looking forward, because when I started, and it really does feel like I started, it was a lonely sandbox. I was one of the only, not just Muslims, but people of color on screen what you call number one or two.
In a racist way.
Yeah, no, I don't mean sandbox, but I mean now I'm happy to be in that sandbox of more global players who look like me, who might even think or believe like me, and we get to play in that. So I'm looking forward to playing with y'all. Thanks.
And I'd like to do, if I may, a shout out for Canada. And the government is amazing that way. They provide funding. For example, I invest in a company called Muslim Kids TV, which I'd love you guys to know about a film that is coming out. It's an animation movie. It's coming out on February 7th and 8th in 500 theaters across the United States. It's an animated movie about the Silk Route, about teaching Muslim kids about how they do, who they are, and the voice of Al-Khwarizmi is done by Omar Sulaiman. The voice of is by, all these, Yasir Qadi has a voice, Yasir Fazaka has a, so we've got this animation with all our sheikhs and imams from different cities. But what is important, again, Canada, you put $1 million, they'll give you $1.5 million to go do your work. That's unique, that's phenomenal. And we should take advantage, I'm just getting it out there. If you want to do productions, consider doing something in Canada because you can get funding from the government.
Hit me up.
Yeah, but the point I really want to make is February 7th and February 8th, that's coming on a couple
Time
of
rollers.
weeks. Right, I mean, time hoppers.
Time hoppers.
Time
thank you.
hoppers. Please, guys, if you have kids between 6 and 13, go to the theater, buy tickets, let the theater owners, let those people know there is a market for this product. And if this succeeds, the next film will succeed. So help us get that out, please.
Julia, if I can get Julia in on this idea of this generational change that's also happening, because this gets to the distribution and getting to consumers, right? The 500 theaters, nobody gets that automatically anymore, and that used to be the baseline and the goal. So what are the advantages of this generational shift that we're in right now?
What I've been thinking a lot in this moment is the fact that we've been through so many boosts and booms, right? The idea of like the documentary golden age. I think I've personally been through 4 documentary golden ages of the past 20 years. And there's a boom, things sell for a lot of money, and everybody's like, this is amazing. And then it all comes crashing down. And what I think a lot about is how do we actually build infrastructure that survives over these moments of crises, and how we don't become dependent on the ebbs and flows of what the market is doing. And as much as I love so many of the changes we are seeing right now, and I think they're extraordinary and they're giving incredible opportunities for many important stories to come out, I want to make sure that we are also being very grounded on how do we actually sustain this over time. And for me, that means actually building structure and consistent funding. I think so many independent filmmakers of all varieties are constantly, they make a film, some films do very well, get Oscar nominations, get sold for a lot of money. And then they're going to make their next film. They're back to the very beginning of the hustle, as if like nothing has happened before. And that is extremely difficult, and that becomes extremely difficult, particularly if you come from minorities that are underrepresented and that have more trouble with whatever the new gatekeepers are that got created in the last boom and boost. So I think we have, people who are working on this issue right now in this panel with funding. And I think the critical thing is what is the infrastructure that can be created so that we survive whatever happens next, right? Wow. And that we're just not just like victims of whatever takes place, but that we proactively think about how we're going to build sustainable, careers for filmmakers over time.
And that cuts across borders, right? That's a key part, right? You're talking about Canada and this idea, but that's truly more of a global reckoning and idea. Farhan, you wanted to jump in before?
I think the conversations move forward, but the point I was going to make, I mean, I want to add to what you were saying. Institution building and creating critical social infrastructure is so needed. I think it shouldn't be lost on people who are here watching this or in the audience. Building a Muslim house, being at Sundance, investing in a generation of people who are in the room, but people who are going to see this is the consistency that's required. And then ultimately creating an ecosystem of writers, producers, actors, funders that can sustain a longevity of producing some really interesting content.
And if I may add in, Muslim House and what we're doing here at Sundance is phenomenal, right? That's what we need. But that's a foundational to build on to what we can. We could potentially, and I believe in that, because as I said earlier, we are playing by a set of rules that was essentially written against us, right? So we should have, as we build our institutions, we should probably build our own film festival, where we honor other heroic people that are doing great works from other countries and other minority communities. I think that would be the next stage of Muslim House. It's the Muslim Film Festival. Or maybe we don't put the word Muslim in it, but it will be part of that narrative. The one thing I was very encouraged today hearing with Habib Vera, who's the chairman of the Muslim Hollywood Bureau, is saying that they're actually now integrating at the middle school level education about filmmaking and storytelling. So you grow up with passion for that, because many people have the abilities and you inbred that in them. And I think that is really something that would be really well worth doing. And finally, again, I just got to do a shout out for two things. Talking about documentaries ebbing and flowing. There's the producer and writer of she's a person who spent 4 or 5 years doing research in Mexico about the Muslims who were kicked out of Spain at the time, Cordoba, and they came, but there was a time which is phenomenal. If you were not Christian, when Isabella Fernandez came and they kicked all the Muslims out, and all the others converted en masse. And if you didn't convert, you couldn't go to the Newfoundland, to the new land. That was the first Muslim ban. It wasn't Trump. So this is a very powerful documentary that is coming out, the lives of these Muslims in hiding. They went to Mexico and lived their lives. Some of them were actually preachers in church, but they were actually preaching Islam. And some of the architecture was maybe could be argued that church was built towards the Kaaba. So it's an amazing thing. But I want to shout out also to the M-Film Lab. We have the M-Film Lab, which is for the minority storytellers. We do competitions we get 200-300 applicants. We take these, we choose 7 to 10 of those applicants. We put them with Hollywood mentors over a period of 2 weeks. And what's different about the M-Film Lab is all of them are minorities. We do it for the Black community, we do it for Latino communities, we do it for South Asian communities, and the Muslim community. And at the end of the cohort, we produce a film. So the winner comes, there's 7, 8 winners who got the cohort benefit with mentors, but there's one winner who gets a film done in their name. So that's a shout out, but thank you.
What I want to say is so important about what you just mentioned and underscore that, Mohanad, is the idea that within each of these identities you mentioned, Muslim can cut across all of those.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's what we're finding.
And that's a key part of it, right? To find ourselves in the same way in each of these unique individual stories. How do we broaden that out so it's not, quote unquote, just another Muslim story?
Well, it's happening anyway on a certain level just by the disruption of the business model in how content is created, how it's distributed, and who is consuming it and where they're consuming it too, right? This isn't just, when we talk about traditional gatekeeping, there was not just people, but platforms were gatekeeping. Territories were gatekeeping, essentially. The idea of Hollywood or other places, those were gatekeeping kind of images. That's all been disrupted because of the new business models and the new audiences. Now we do have a global community that's making films, seeing films, distributing, and funding. Muslims fit in that, just as you pointed out. Being Muslim is a global identity. Just like people talk, we are known for religion, but we are actually a culture. We believe in religion, but Muslims are a culture, like every other culture that people identify with. So we need to start, whether you're Muslim or not, those who are allies and those who are Muslim curious, we've all got to understand that we're not just a religious denominator. That is a fundamental individual truth, perhaps. But as a culture, we are a global culture. That means we are a global popular culture, because culture and pop culture and we are a global subculture. And we contain multitudes of identities, of our sexuality, of our gender orientation, just like everybody else does, no matter what the politicians, whoever are the gatekeepers telling you, the narrative sayers, right, are saying to you. So now is the moment where representation doesn't just matter. We need to go beyond just representing. That's what I found, right? 20 years ago, I could get away with just representing. Yeah. But now we live, because there's more of us, we are now a critical mass, and now we have to do things much more critically.
I think good storytelling moves you in ways that are unimaginable. It's a bridge to your heart. And ultimately, so many of us are in the business of changing hearts and minds. I think that when I watched you 20 years ago, when I was 22, sorry, I just have to...
You aged both of us. I'm kidding.
As an Imam Ammar, right? If you haven't seen that, you have to see him as Imam Ammar. This is the coolest Imam that you can come across. Someone you can talk to. Somebody that was approachable by the community.
Well, there's also, don't forget, Mahershala Ali as Imam in
that's
Rami.
the new Imam, for sure.
That's a pretty cool one.
We kind of need... So part of what storytelling also does is it unlocks imagination. And it unlocks imagination at a time when there's so much doom and gloom. There's so much sadness. And the question becomes and with Islamophobia, Islamophobia beats you down not to have imagination. So storytelling is in some way almost unlocking that potential and showing us what the future could look like, what our communities could look like. And so the people who are watching in 80 different countries, they're saying, hey, maybe one day we're going to have an imam like that. Maybe one day we're going to have the people that we can identify with. So I find that as a very optimistic way of thinking about the future, is unlocking that potential.
Well, and it starts with unlocking within family systems, telling your own stories, and being able to speak with your voice about who you are and what your experience is.
And if I may, I said it earlier, but I want to be specific. It's one thing to make film, it's something else to distribute it and have it be seen. And what Watermelon did is being able to create that ability for distribution for all those films that wouldn't get anywhere. So I want to really give them an amazing shout out, because they really put a lot of money, a lot of courage and daring to do it at the time they did it. And the shout out I want to do, please, I don't know if you know that or not, those guys have Watermelon Plus, right? It's $7 per month for the price of a cup of coffee, right? Not only you get to see amazing films produced by many people whose films that are worth watching, but more importantly, for them to have a sustainable mechanism, your $7 is nothing to you. To them, if we add up and create multiples, 100,000 $7 will go a long way towards sustaining them, growing them, giving them to the next level. So please, yourselves, your families, people you know, please subscribe for that $7. It will make a lot of difference for your business, your future, your storytelling.
Julia, you got us started on the distribution and the institutional necessity, right, to cut across what used to be traditional borders, whether political borders or even these institutional film borders. Let's get back to the political one. Is this enough to do the kinds of political change we want?
That is a big question that I and certainly our team at Just Vision are constantly grappling with, because one of the dangers of, danger is too much of a strong word, but one of the pitfalls of this direct-to-consumer also effort is that you could end up all just talking to the same people. And there are a lot of people there who are interested in that work. But if you're just all reaching the same people, right? There's all these amazing films that are getting made, but they are all speaking to the folks that already agree with you. It can be hard to create systemic change that actually leads to what ultimately is what I'm interested in, which is impacting directly people's lives
Social
on the
cohesion.
ground. Yeah, political change, policy change at the end of the day, like actual things that materially improve people's lives. And I think, so the way that we at Just Vision have always thought about this in the way we think about distribution is obviously it's great to get as many eyeballs as possible, and that's one goal. But equally, if not more important, is really thinking through what are the audiences that you want to reach based on what theory of change you have for reaching a particular goal. And that may not be what everybody's interested in. You know, there are many filmmakers that want to make a film to artistically express themselves and want people to watch it, and that's it. And that's totally fine and good and beautiful, because art is beautiful for its own sake. But
words have power.
But
and
we are
images have
interested
power.
in change. And so thinking really methodically about who are your audiences, that both informs how you make your films, like it informs production decisions itself, creative decisions, and then strategic decisions around launching your film and distribution and outreach and impact, and what are the ways you're going to be thinking about what your film has actually achieved once you have 3 years of a film in distribution, analyzing that and then thinking through, okay, what has that done? What is necessary next? What is the next intervention that we want to do here to continue moving the needle on this particular issue? And so for us, you know, I think I completely agree. I think Watermelon, as far as like infrastructure, talking about that, it's an incredible example of that kind of infrastructure building. And I think thinking through what are the key ways that we're going to keep expanding how we think about this nexus between films as a not only the art, but also as a tool for social change, which is core to how we think about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's shout it out, please. Yeah, clap it out. This is important. Thank you, Julia, for saying that. The vision of why you tell a story or why you are inspired to share a story, I think, is absolutely key. And you're right. And all art, I don't want to get all Oscar Wilde, because art can exist for a purpose, right? But we also, our next pitfall, I think we also have to be careful of, and we were talking about this in the pre-call a few weeks ago, is what is next for us as an identity of global Muslim storytellers or those who are telling stories with Muslims, right? Because once you break, like all things that are phobic, once you break one phobia, it's actually going to help break all the phobias, right? So you can tell better stories just generally. But we also want to make sure, I think now, and we're not necessarily at that place quite right yet, because we're so much of this post this and post that world, especially for Muslim individuals and representatives, depending on which country you're in. And you can be even a Muslim country and feel you can't speak as a Muslim out loud. But we are hoping, I think, to the next phase where we're not going to be just about ensuring social change through our art and ensuring that people understand why or how not to victimize us. Mm-hmm. And then also how and why not to fetishize us. Because sometimes I have found, especially on the acting side, right? I haven't done it for a while, but back in the day, you would get called into a moment for an audition or whatever, and the scene was definitely, no, you didn't have to play a terrorist or something like that, but you still weren't just playing a person. You were playing a type, right? And you would be up against other folks who were actually playing humans. And that's what I loved about the Little Moss character, although he was an imam, and astaghfirullah, I'm nowhere near an imam, but he was a real person, it seemed to me. He didn't have to be an imam to be that person. And that's what I loved about that character. And that's what we need to start seeing more of, so that the Islam or the Muslim or whatever that means is part of the story, but isn't telling the story for the purposes of ensuring you know what this is about. We do learn as humans when we're not lectured to. We appreciate art much more when it's not lecturing us. That's why we say art for art's sake, because it's actually never for art's sake. It's always to empower and create change. Art creates change the moments it's even a thought of. But we just have to get over our own selves, and we have to ensure others get over us so we can just be normal, like we are.
And this is, sorry if I may, in terms of Rami, the series, I mean, you expose your vulnerabilities, you show your authentic story, which is phenomenal, and then bring in, throw in the comedy on that. And as Muammar as well, I mean, these are two big success. Talk about change.
Huge.
These are the type of changes that we've seen. Saturday Night, coming in and having presentation twice, I think. I mean, Saturday Night Live. Now we become part of the culture of the United States. And I'll end
Started by a Canadian, just saying.
Yeah, well, I gave the shout out.
I know.
There's a big missing piece.
But please let me make my one last point, if I may. There's filmmakers all over the world, right? Bollywood does more films than Hollywood. In Africa, they've got phenomenal amounts of films. Just we here in the United States are carrying that responsibility that whatever we do will disseminate across the world way stronger, way better. There's more audience that won't appreciate that. So remember that you're holding that. That's a big, big feather in your cap already without even starting, just by starting here.
And I'm so glad you mentioned that, because it is particularly talking about global storytelling, those of us, former diplomats here, that idea of the awareness of the global south and how little that comes through when we talk in these hallowed settings and these festivals and gatherings like Davos as well, is the majority of the world is in the global south, Latin America, Africa, that we are, majority of the world now is under the age of 40. Are we really speaking to those people? Are we bringing those Muslim narratives in, as you said, Mohanad, because we have resources and platforms that are American born and bred, but are we serving that piece of the puzzle?
I think the story, that I understand you're making a documentary on Mamdani, right? And I traveled last year extensively, and no matter where I went, which cab you're sitting in, which city you go to, and if you said, we're gonna make buses faster, and we're gonna have, free childcare, and affordable or freezing rent.
And free Palestine.
Yep, they immediately could list the three things, no matter where you were. And that's because that's the global aspect around the storytelling, that your stories are resonating, they're making a difference, and people want to see hope and aspiration. And so if the fact that America is an amplifying stage, but it is connecting with millions of people, like we're looking at 1.9 billion people if we just look at our own communities. And so that's a large market.
And just to share a little bit more about that, is because I think it's really important for us as we're embarking on this film and releasing it, that obviously Zohran Mamdani is an incredibly charismatic, brilliant strategist. And he won because of a social movement. He won because people were tired, so tired of the lies that politicians in this country have been telling to them on many aspects, many issue areas. And this is very much the story that we're telling. And I mention this in the context of what you're saying, because I think that's a reality that people are experiencing around the world, across the global south, across Latin America. I'm from Brazil. I know how much this campaign meant for Brazilian society. Like everybody just constantly talking about it. They're so excited. There is this need that isn't about this man. This is not a great man theory of history kind of film that we're making. This is really about what has happened, what is the moment that we're living in, which is, let's just be honest, like tremendously challenging in the political landscape. I want to just acknowledge what is happening right now in Minneapolis, and how, I flew over here and I was on the plane watching the scenes of, this nurse getting executed on the middle of the street of the United States. And we're sitting here and I am pretty scared. You know, I was born in a country that was a dictatorship. Brazil was under dictatorship when I was born. This is a reality. Countries, this happens to places. And for me, the story of Zohran isn't about this one man. It's really about like people, there are so many people out there who don't want that, who don't want what we're seeing in government right now. And how do you respond to this demand? How can we expect our candidates, our elected officials to recognize this and to rise up to the moment of what actually the public wants? And that's the story we're trying to tell.
Fascists don't like art. Someone very important to me told me that. In the last few minutes we have, before we go to questions, I want to make sure you all get to participate in this conversation too. I would like for each of you to share a thought of what you plan to do in 2026 to, one thing you're going to do to help move authentic storytelling forward. Farhan, do you have your own?
Well, I might as well start if nobody's, because I've thought about it and I'm doing it. I mean, I find the M-Film Lab, again, not to plug it again, that's what it's all about. It's about the authentic stories from these minority groups. So this, to me, is what's going to change and is going to make the difference.
So another cohort, bigger?
And what we're doing now, just, again, I know this is maybe not popular, but I'll say it anyway because I believe in it. One of the big things in change that's happening in the world hasn't been mentioned in this session at all, for good reason, is AI. And this is something that has been frowned upon. Every artist, every director, everybody, even the board of directors of the M-Film Lab, when I proposed that the film we're about to do, which is about a period piece set at the time of the gold rush, where people are out there, so it was something, the period piece is going to be very expensive to do. We said, why don't we integrate some AI and components into this? And the whole board with office says, absolutely not. So to me, I ended up, because I serve on the board of trustees of University of California, Irvine, we helped found it's called the Applied Innovation, where we integrate, we have a co-fund, the $50 million fund. We're now in our third fund in terms of funding ideas and new projects. So I'm engaged in finding something called the narrative, but narrative in the middle is spelled with AI. And, I'm kind of now acting against my board of M-Film Lab, but that's nothing to do with my life, is AI should be considered as a tool. We're putting our heads in the sand if we just keep ignoring it and we don't want to touch it, we don't want to know it. Use it like the music industry did. They found it's a way to help and advance your thinking, the ideas. Humans are not going to be taken out of the loop. We cannot, right? But so we're doing a study, as I'm doing now, that's why I think it's meaningful. It's an academic study on AI and its impact on industry. Right? What does it do? Does it harm? What does harm do? Does it have benefits? Weigh the risks against the advantages and disadvantages, and then come up with an academic study about AI and film industry. And I hope one day be able to share that outcome on the next Muslim House, inshallah, with Hollywood the Impact Bureau. Thank you.
Thank you. Farhan, do you have yours?
Yes. Well, first of all, I just want to give a shout out to Naira for moderating and for being incredible
clap once I cut off
storyteller.
their speeches that aren't questions.
That's
so
right.
Thank
That's
you for
right.
getting it in now.
All right.
And I first saw her on CNN, and I took pictures. So she's like,
okay. So I met Mohammed and all of these folks on a Zoom about a week ago, and I was so excited. But my kids were not asleep, and so I was sitting there in my basement, no makeup on. I'm like, yeah, let's talk about this, take that. And apparently 2 hours later, I show up with a totally different look, and Mohammed thought that was very fun. Thank you.
All right, I'm not making any comment about your looks, but I'm going to move on. And we're working in partnership with Doris Duke to help support another generation of storytelling. So if there's anybody in this room or people that you know who are interested in coming and taking part in public narrative, we want to help you come in and take part. It's about $10,000 to attend. We cover the cost. And so if there's a way for us to help you get your story out or to work on your story, we want to do that. So that's number one. And
In any medium?
Pardon?
Your
In
story
any
medium.
medium. That's right. Because we feel like it has to show up in all these different shapes and forms. So one, and then second thing that I'm taking away from meeting with the wonderful people that I have, just even since breakfast and here, is I want to go back and make a larger commitment for us to fund more work around storytelling and arts and the community. I mean, the things that we're seeing here, the stories we've heard about funding getting cut in the arts and the culture work, we have to find more resources for this work and for our communities. So that's the thing I'm taking away.
Julia, do you have something other than completing this film?
Oh, other than completing.
I think that's a good one, right? Like, I think that's going to take most of 2026.
That is, and I do want to, I have, I think, 3 team members here, Amber, Rabab, and Mary, who are my colleagues and have been working with me on this project. And that should take the vast majority of my time, but I also help run Just Vision, and we do a lot of investigative work, and we just launched something called the Palestine Reporting Lab, which is an investigative journalism incubator for Palestinian journalists. So if you know Palestinian journalists who are interested, please tell them to get in touch with us.
That's great, thank you.
I promise they won't get shot.
Astaghfirullah. From one ex-diplomat to another, what's your next thing?
A couple of things, hopefully, inshallah. Actually, after shouting out Canada so much, one of the things that is missing in Canada is this. Basically what MPAC Hollywood Bureau does. So we're hopefully bringing some of the MPAC folks to Canada and some of the Canadian folks in the business to meet with the MPAC folks in 2026 to really start talking about how can we make this a North American project rather than just a United States project and take over the world from there. And then sort of back in the game, I have deviated. It's been a beautiful run as a diplomat, but I finished that off late last year, 2026. Bismillah to my new creative self, hopefully working with lots of people in the room and definitely working with my wife, Kirsten Stewart, because she created things like, she was the reason behind Little Mosque, behind things like, if you've heard of Schitt's Creek, again, that's on her dime. If you've heard of Kim's Convenience, those wouldn't happen without her. So I figure she's probably one of my secret weapons as I look to create again. So we're going to work
Which is
together.
no longer a secret.
Yeah, well, there you go.
So if I may.
I love that you're mentioning Schitt's Creek and Little Mosque at the same sentence and like that. Like truly, like this is where we're at.
The merge.
Yeah, I've got just a quick thing to say, and then a fear that I mentioned, but you didn't allow me to finish my sentence before interrupting me earlier.
No more
but,
plugs.
But no more plugs. A shout out to a recipient of the Hollywood Muslim Bureau, Josh Seftel, who happens to be in the crowd. I just happened to see him. Good to see you, Josh. I know you got some films, Oscar-nominated film, and Strangers at the Gate. What a film that got Oscar nomination. And Josh keeps doing more and more amazing work. So welcome. A new one here right now. So thank you. Good, great seeing you. My fear that I was telling you, and I wanted to finish my sentence, is if David and Larry Ellison acquired Paramount, and they got that. And my fear now is as they go with the new bid against Netflix to acquire, being able to acquire, that would include HBO Max, and CNN. And for once, it's going to be potential. If that happens, now you can have extreme Fox News and CNN all controlled by one party, by one voice. Just money speaks, right? So that is the fear that I have, and I hope it doesn't happen. But if it does, even though the audience is dropping per capita, or they're getting less and less, but that audience matters, because we have to wait till the 22-year-olds another 20 years till they get there. The people who are there now are being extremely empowered, and those poison that gets spewed will really act against not just Muslims, but all minority communities.
I'm going to put my history professor hat on and say that it is not going to be the first time we've had control of the distribution of media by deeply pocketed individuals with agendas, and so that is also part of the American story, is how we push back and how we gain back control of the First Amendment and what that truly means here as part of the American story. But I do want to open it up to questions now. So, awesome. And your name, please.
My voice is a little bit going. We have a mic.
Hi, my name is Defne. I'm from Istanbul, Turkey, based in New York now. Thank you so much for doing this. It means a lot. I was wondering, as someone who was also raised in a country without going, since we're being recorded, without saying too much. Like it's tough to make art there, let's say the least, with the regime and everything. What would you say to any artist that does not want to censor their work, but also are worried about the health of their family, loved ones, and how far can we go as someone who is both based in U.S., so having more opportunity to do that, but then wanting to go back home and make a change?
Mohammed, how have you advised people?
Look, I mean, that question came up in the Mehdi Hassan session at some point, and these are like people with big platforms, and yet they decide to resist and do what they're doing. And to me, I would imagine that if there was 1 or 2 or 10 doing that work, it's easy to get at them, right? You target them, you silence them. When there's 100, 200, 1,000, 2,000, it becomes more difficult, it becomes a movement. So to me is, and I heard that at Davos, by the way, at the conference, saying they used to, I'm not sure who was president was saying in Russia they used to put a sign, what a great government, what a great country, and that everybody in that would put their sign because they don't rock and make any waves. It took, and they did that for 30, 50 years, and then once one day things were so bad, when they had the courage to take the sign off, and then everybody started taking the sign off. So the idea is there are role models that have to stand out and do the work. And that's why you get the award of courage, because somebody like Josh Seftel came out and was talking, is a Jewish guy who has suffered his own attacks and on against him for being Jewish, is standing up and telling the stories of those Muslims. So these are the voices of courage. I'm sure he wasn't popular. I'm sure he got attacked. I'm sure he had issues, but he stood up for what he knew to be right. And that's what we all need to do. If we all do that, then it becomes difficult to stop a movement. But 1 or 2, we will be hunted down.
And so in social change theory, a movement is not the leader, the first person to come up with the idea to go. A movement is the first person who follows, and then the people who follow them, right? So that is also the thing. Support the people who are out there saying it first and help them build that movement.
I have 2 thoughts on that. Number 1, this is very serious, and it's not to be taken lightly. And I do think that there needs to be really serious process of risk analysis from the very beginning of development through production, through post-production. If it's not working, you revise it. For me, safety is the first question, always. The second thing is we live in a world, unfortunately, particularly in the US, of great individualism, and the risk is all just on that one person. And now I sound like a broken record, but we need infrastructures so that the filmmakers and the journalists are not alone and are not bearing those decisions and thinking through those and have resources to think about how to keep their families at home safe. And there's a lot that can be done. And this is long, we can have a conversation afterwards. But this is something that can be built into funding models, so that we're not being like, oh, what a great story, this filmmaker wants to do this, very brave, not taking a dig at you, but let's not count on oh, he's so brave. It's no, let's make sure that we are offering a whole, that we're enveloping these filmmakers and these journalists with a sense of safety and really thinking carefully about how we provide the resources that they may need in order to tell those stories so that they don't feel alone.
And that's a big part of Muslim storytelling also. It's a collective, right? The idea of taking care of each other and humanity, we need to represent that in our infrastructure. Next question? Yep. With the pink scarf.
Falling off. Hi, everyone. I'm Renita. I am Indian American, and I'm a filmmaker and an author. And my question is a little bit different because I tell the stories of the South Asian experience, contemporary as well as historical. And we've talked about some of the difficulties we have in other countries. In India, we have a different kind of problem, or a similar kind of problem, where it's difficult to tell the Muslim story today. Whether it's the story of a Muslim today or a historical story. And so my question is, I don't know, is there an opportunity to relocate some of that storytelling to North America, to America, to Canada, to explore our past and our contemporary Muslim protagonists, because we can't do it in India today.
I definitely say Canada is a place, not to get, but I'm the shout outer. But there are projects that are, Canada is one of the only countries that has co-production treaties with more than 50 countries around the world. The US is an anomaly. The US is one of the only countries that has the industry that does and has no co-production treaty. Everything is co-venture if it is a co-production. So there are government, as Mohammed was talking about, incentives in telling global stories from a Canadian perspective. The Pakistani film In Flames, Aag, recently, which won the big Directors Fortnight thing, or at least got recognized during their Zahrar Khan, it was funded by Canada, and it was going to be Pakistan's entry into the global Oscars. But it was fully funded by a Canadian entity, the government entity. So I'm not saying I know exactly the ways, but I'm just saying that's a microcosm of the macro possibilities.
There's another possibility that I would suggest potentially, because I'm always, more recently, I'm glued to YouTube, and I find Al Jazeera is what I'm listening to a lot. And they do phenomenal productions. In fact, we were engaged in supporting a film about a state legislative who won her race. She's a black woman, and they actually featured her on Al Jazeera. So I find that Al Jazeera has become this platform where they are wanting to tell those stories, whether it's in India, whether it's in the United States, anywhere, they're open, and they do great productions, and I would suggest you would explore that in addition to Canada. Qatar has become now a new center for peace and everything else in between. Yeah.
Everything else.
Hello. I wanted you to please address, I find it fascinating that CNN is considered kind of left, first of all. I want you to discuss, just like,
Not far left for you, huh?
It's not left at all, actually. It's a mouthpiece for war. But the point is that, and
most of the Republicans on CNN would also agree with you. So let's be clear.
But my question for you is that, I find that the conversations are always about the binaries, which you sometimes identify. But I find very often that they're the same side, and they're being enabled. For example, Trump couldn't exist without Democrats enabling him. So I want you to address those of us who are enabling people by either remaining silent or by actually being complicit by for example, considering things like CNN as legitimate, objective places for news.
I'll start with that one, because I've had direct experience with this and the change that's happened since 2015 to now in our news media ecosystem. As a talking head, as somebody who had to really work hard to be recognized as a national security expert, even though I don't, quote unquote, look like one. There came a point, I also happened to be 9 months pregnant at the time, that first hit the Hillary Trump election, where I really started to question my appearing on these panels. And I'd come out of government thinking, more diversity, I have to prove, I walk the walk, all the stuff that I've worked on, I need to show this example and do these things myself. And at that point in election night overnight coverage, I was like, they can't have some of these conversations if I'm not also there to have that conversation with them. And I was being booked often with people, I'm like, you are not an expert, you have no experience in this, and film and television could be very flattening in that way, news in particular, right? You have two boxes, and whatever title gets put next to it, but they look equal in standing. And after that election, I made that choice that I am not going to, unless I know I can go in and make a strong argument, and I will be heard, and there are moments that it's important to do that pushback. I'm not going to participate in that charade anymore, and I'm going to find those other vehicles and other ways of having thoughtful discussions or sharing insights that don't feel like complicity. And I think that's some of what people don't realize on CNN right now. Is, there are people who are paid to show up every day and be the controversial person. And then everybody else is just lucky and happy to be there and make their 5 minutes of airtime. So that's a big tension too. CNN actively pays, and MSNBC too, for those agitators to help with their numbers in that dynamic. It's not, news panels are not news. That's the reality.
And that's true across the board. And I think what we are getting here, maybe with this question, and I think your very important specific example of that is, when do you engage, right? When do you believe there is a role for participating and creating change from inside, and when do you need to withdraw your consent and boycott spaces? And I think that's a really, really rich place to explore. And my experience is that unless just showing up, I think you made the right choice. If you're just showing up and not actually having any back channel for changing internally what's going on, is useless. But the other potential way of engaging and not giving up that space, because also when you withdraw, then you give up that space and that's it, right? Is there a way of organizing behind the scenes so that you can actually change that place institutionally? And I've seen that done over 20 years really well on many places, on many institutions over the issue that, many issues, the one I particularly work on, and it's Palestinian rights. And that does require a lot of diplomacy and community, because it has to be, you have to be able to show to that institution that there are numbers behind it, and to be honest, the threat of eventual withdrawal. But I think showing that there is engaging first and attempting to change it, I think can be a very powerful way of actually changing institutions from within.
Absolutely. Final question.
Hi, thank you for this wonderful panel. I'm so glad you're here and you're doing the work. I'm from the Arab Film and Media Institute. A lot of the work that I do is I am doing partnerships with studios and with streaming. The one thing I keep on hearing is content. Our type of content is just depressing. And this is something I would love for others, like when they're applying to our festival, or when I'm even showing these short. So, for example, I did a partnership with Pixar where I showed short animations from Arab animators. There were 5 animations that I chose. They were so depressing. One was about a guy waiting for death in Palestine. It was claymation. It was gorgeous, but it's just depressing.
So is this a question? Because I think you
It is actually something about what can you guys do whenever you're funding these movies, when it's not just documentaries or narratives about war. Can we actually push for different types of narratives that show us in a different space and show our creativity, like something about food, something about the wonders of Ramadan, of suhoor. So the reason I said that, how can we push this where the creators need to also see beyond the pain and suffering?
And this, we had talked about this, and you briefly mentioned, but the idea, and we see this happen in the Black community, this has come up as a conversation of what gets the awards and the accolades, it's trauma. How do we avoid trauma porn in our community?
By starting to not fund it, because I do think that funding actually needs to fund everything. Because in every other culture, the funding funds everything, right? We shouldn't actually be picking things based on these criterias which will further our aim. Yes, there are places for that and moments for that and institutions for that, but we also need to create other things. And like other things, Little Mosque was a moment of time. It ran 6 seasons, it got 100 episodes, but it was a comedy. And we were making fun of ourselves as well as making fun of those who didn't understand Muslims, and making fun of small towns and making fun of big cities. And we were just happened to be Muslim. And those are also really important stories. And how do we know that? Because it did go to 80 countries around the world. It did win the inductions into the Paley Center. By episode 4, we were inducted the same year The Sopranos were. The Sopranos were in season 4. We were in episode 4. And again, we were a humble little Canadian show. So if it's made, they will come. It's that simple. So find it, make it, fund it, and they will love it.
I think things like, as I was saying earlier, Rami, Muammar, comedy brings in, that's nice. But the reality is, again, we're sitting here in a room full of artists and creatives. We all are going through trauma. We're living it. And it's like telling somebody, a guy, I don't want to give the example, any just guy starting his life, he's just working hard and whatever, and say, why aren't you listening, why aren't you going to watch the opera? Why aren't you listening to classical music and enjoying? Well, wait a minute, I'm at a different level altogether. We're not there yet. All our lives are impacted, and these authentic stories are coming out from the heart. And unfortunately, as much as that, somebody on the outside say, oh, show me this, I want to see that. The reality is the work comes from the heart, and that's, we have to go through that trauma. And actually, very often I find the people we deal with at the M-Film Lab, it's really therapeutic. They're writing these things that comes out and helps them deal with their lives and with the things that they're missing in life. And hopefully we will get, 5 years, 10 years from now where, so there's the reptilian brain, you're working and dealing with fight or flight, or you have the things where you get to the cerebral and, start enjoying that. So I think we're at that level still, unfortunately.
But I think we're seeing that. I think we're again at a moment in time where it's hard, right? We are in a post. Like Little Mosque came 5 years after 9/11. It took that time. Mohammed speaking, like we are. It takes time to be able to get the confidence to be able, and it's not just about comedies. It's not about laughter. I guess what I'm saying is it doesn't have to be a comedy or a tragedy. It can actually just be about Wall Street. And Wall Street can have a Muslim main character. And I'm just picking that out of the hat. So can Star Wars, right? Like, Muslims are everywhere. We contain multitudes. We have lived horrible lives. We have been oppressed. We have been victors. We have done the oppressing. We have been billionaires. We have led states. We're politicians. We're academics. We do know how to be everything, because we are everything. We just don't have the ecosystem right now with our allies and within ourselves, and we don't have that critical mass of funding, or I don't even want to call it funding, because funding makes it seem like philanthropy, and that's another part of the problem, which is a Canadian problem. Canadians don't understand that this is a business, man, right? This is a business, and so we got to think about where money is put. But yes, money should be put in all stories so that the artists can be authentic to themselves. So if they have a sad story to tell, it gets funded. And if they have a Wall Street story, it gets funded. If they have a sci-fi story, it gets funded. And it gets invested in, not just funded from I'm going to give you charity. Yes, and not just from, but it will take all of us. And we'd go nowhere, but the allies will say, if you don't do it, why should I? That's the first thing everybody learns. So we do have to do it, and we don't do it enough. We're thankful to have someone like Mohammed, but we also can't just rely on the amazing, because he can only do so much, right? And his team. And he has to fight his own board, as you heard, because that's what it takes. But he's doing the fight. We need more Mohammeds. We need more everybody in this room. We need like triple this people. And that's what I think Sue and Salam and the folks at MPAC are creating.
I think we can leave it there on that key point of authentic storytelling. That's the trick. Authentic storytelling, and build the institutions that will allow us to tell those stories globally. Thank you, everyone.